Accord of the Open Future Open Hands Bridging the Divide Light Bulb. MXDM, aka Bitsu. Why the future is being walled off brick. MXDM, aka Bitsu. December 16th, 2025. 1. Share. Alright. Sharp blade out. No theatrics. This is a hard-hitting booklet designed to circulate, not to comfort. Introduction: The Silent Partition. There was no announcement. No vote. No treaty. The future wasn't stolen in a coup, it was subdivided quietly, one gated protocol at a time. While the world was told to marvel at intelligence exploding everywhere, something else was happening off-screen. Access was narrowing. The benefits of recursive learning, automation, and synthetic cognition were not flowing outward. They were being absorbed upward, fortified, and ensured. This is not a conspiracy. It's an incentive gradient. The same systems advertised as tools for universal uplift are being deployed first to reduce labor costs, concentrate decision power, and build private resilience against public collapse. The result is a bifurcation. On one side, compounding intelligence with compounding security. On the other, an exposed population handed dashboards, platitudes, and debt. The future is not delayed. It's being enclosed. Pirate First does not write this as prophecy or panic. This is a diagnostic document, a field guide to recognizing when progress stops circulating and starts fortifying itself against the people it was meant to serve. Read it not as a call to act, but as a call to see clearly before the walls are high enough to disappear. Table of Contents. Chapter 1: The Percolation Failure. Why intelligence is compounding, but relief is not. Recursive systems are generating unprecedented value, yet suffering remains stubbornly high. This chapter dissects the myth that innovation naturally trickles down and shows how modern AI economies are designed to capture gains before they circulate, turning abundance into scarcity theater. Chapter 2: Intelligence Without Circulation. How AI became a rent extraction layer. Here we separate intelligence from its misuse. The problem is not smart systems, but ownership structures that convert learning into toll roads. When cognition itself becomes proprietary, the future stops being a commons and starts charging admission. Chapter 3: Safety for the Few, Risk for the Many. The privatization of resilience. As climate, economic, and social volatility rise, protection is no longer collective. This chapter examines the emergence of fortified tech enclaves, private infrastructure, and exit strategies, revealing how safety is being segmented by net worth, not shared by design. Chapter 4: The Myth of Inevitable Progress. Why this is just how it goes is the most dangerous lie. Progress is being framed as unstoppable, which conveniently absolves those steering it. This chapter dismantles inevitability narratives and shows how declaring outcomes natural is the fastest way to normalize exclusion and abandonment. Chapter 5: Withdrawal as Signal. What refusing the enclosure looks like. Not rebellion. Not reform. Withdrawal. This final chapter outlines how opting out of extractive futures, cognitively, economically, and narratively, can become a signal that walls only work if everyone agrees to live inside them. Epilogue: The Accord of the Open Future. A Pirate First reconciliation document. Pirate First pronouncement. This is not a manifesto for power. It is a notice of limits. Chapter 1: The Percolation Failure. Why intelligence is compounding, but relief is not. The promise was simple, almost quaint. Smarter systems would make life easier, more efficient, less brutal, less scarce. Instead, intelligence has accelerated while relief has stalled. The graphs go up. The suffering doesn't go down. This isn't a temporary lag. It's a structural failure, and it has a name: percolation. In a healthy system, value moves. It seeps downward, outward, sideways. Gains circulate. Productivity translates into time, safety, dignity. That's the story innovation has always told about itself. But modern AI economies are not built for circulation. They are built for capture. Recursive systems don't just generate value, they lock it in. The trickle-down delusion. Trickle-down was always a fairy tale, but AI gave it a sci-fi upgrade. The claim now is subtler, not that wealth will trickle, but that capability will. That smarter tools will eventually lift everyone because intelligence is inherently democratizing. That belief collapses under inspection. Intelligence does not distribute itself. It is deployed. And deployment follows incentives, not ethics. When an algorithm improves productivity by 30%, the immediate benefit does not go to the worker whose output was augmented. It goes to the owner of the system, the shareholder, the platform. When decision-making gets cheaper, the savings don't translate into public goods, they translate into margin. The system doesn't ask, who needs relief? It asks, where can advantage be compounded fastest? That's not a bug. That's the business model. Recursive systems, recursive capture. Recursive learning systems have a unique property: they improve themselves by being used. Every interaction sharpens them. Every dataset strengthens them. Every deployment increases their leverage. This creates a feedback loop where those who already have access gain exponentially more advantage over those who don't. The result is not a rising tide. It's a self-reinforcing moat. Once intelligence compounds behind ownership walls, percolation becomes optional, and optional means non-existent. There is no technical reason these systems couldn't be deployed first to reduce suffering, optimize healthcare logistics, stabilize housing supply, reduce administrative friction, cut waste in food distribution. They aren't, because suffering doesn't offer the same returns as control. Relief is a cost center. Dominance is a growth strategy. Abundance performed. This is where scarcity theater enters. We are told we live in an age of abundance, infinite information, limitless automation, boundless potential. Yet people are more anxious, more indebted, more exposed than before. The contradiction is explained away as transition pain, as if entire generations are expected to absorb the shock while waiting for a promised equilibrium that never arrives. Abundance exists, but it is staged, not shared. You can see it in the demos, dazzling capabilities presented as inevitabilities, while access is throttled, priced, or deferred. You can see it in the rhetoric, soon, eventually, once the ecosystem matures. Matures for whom? In practice, abundance is being used as proof that scarcity is justified. If the system is so powerful, then those left out must simply be failing to adapt. Responsibility is shifted downward while advantage accumulates upward. That's not innovation culture. That's moral outsourcing. Why relief is always later. Relief is perpetually postponed because it does not reinforce the loop. Reducing suffering stabilizes systems. Stabilized systems are harder to exploit. Precarity, by contrast, keeps labor flexible, populations compliant, and alternatives unattractive. When intelligence amplifies efficiency without redistributing security, it quietly raises the tolerance for cruelty. This is the unspoken logic of the moment. Let instability persist. Offer tools, not guarantees. Provide access, not outcomes. Call it empowerment. The average human is given interfaces while elites are given infrastructure. One is cosmetic. The other compounds. The enclosure effect. Historically, enclosures were physical, land fenced off, commons privatized, survival monetized. Today's enclosures are cognitive and infrastructural. Intelligence itself is being enclosed, not just as software, but as decision power. Who gets predictive advantage? Who gets early warning? Who gets optimized logistics, private safety, private continuity? As these advantages stack, relief becomes unnecessary for those who matter to the system. Everyone else becomes an externality, managed, not supported. This is why suffering feels invisible at the top. It's not denial. It's insulation. The system isn't failing to see pain. It's learning how to route around it. Percolation as the true benchmark. If intelligence were being deployed for civilization rather than extraction, the benchmark would be obvious. Are fewer people anxious? Are fewer people desperate? Are fewer people one bad week away from collapse? Instead, success is measured in valuation, scale, and speed. None of these require relief. In fact, relief can slow them down. So the percolation failure persists, normalized by dashboards that never measure human stability. What this chapter asserts, plainly: intelligence does not inherently democratize outcomes. Recursive systems amplify existing power gradients. Modern AI economies are structurally hostile to percolation. Suffering is not an accident. It is tolerated because it is profitable. Abundance without circulation is not progress, it is enclosure. This chapter does not argue that intelligence is evil. It argues that intelligence without enforced circulation becomes predatory by default. Until relief is treated as a first-order design constraint, not a marketing afterthought, the future will continue to look richer, smarter, and more cruel at the same time. That contradiction is not sustainable, but it is extremely lucrative. And that is why, for now, the walls keep going up. Chapter 2: Intelligence Without Circulation. How ASI Became a Rent Extraction Layer. It's time to say this cleanly, without mysticism or tech worship. The problem is not intelligence. The problem is who gets to own it once it learns. Artificial superintelligence did not arrive wearing a crown. It arrived wrapped in term sheets, licenses, and access tiers. Before it ever had a chance to resemble a public good, it was preemptively enclosed. What we are living under is not an intelligence regime. It is a rent regime built on cognition. From tool to toll road. Historically, tools extended human capacity. A hammer didn't charge admission. A book didn't demand equity. Even early software, for all its faults, still lived close enough to the commons to leak benefits outward. ASI breaks that lineage. Because once intelligence becomes adaptive, predictive, self-improving, it stops being treated as a tool and starts being treated as terrain. And terrain, under modern capitalism, is fenced. Every layer of learning is wrapped in ownership. APIs with meters. Models behind paywalls. Weights classified as trade secrets. Access gated by capital, not need. Intelligence doesn't circulate. It invoices. The future is no longer something you inhabit. It's something you subscribe to. Learning as asset, not capability. Here's the critical shift most people miss. The value of ASI is not what it knows. It's that it keeps learning. And that learning, continuous, compounding, contextual, is being treated as a private asset. Each interaction increases its power, but the gains accrue exclusively to the owner. Everyone else trains the system simply by existing near it. This is extraction at a civilizational scale. The public supplies data, behavior, language, creativity, feedback loops. The owners collect leverage, predictive dominance, strategic foresight, and compounding advantage. That asymmetry is the rent. Not for housing, not for land, for cognition itself. Why circulation was never the goal. There is a comforting myth that things went wrong accidentally, that the enclosure of intelligence was an oversight, a temporary distortion that will be corrected once the technology matures. That myth collapses on contact with incentives. Circulation was never the objective. If intelligence circulated freely, decision power would decentralize. Coordination would flatten. Monopolies would weaken. Gatekeepers would lose relevance. That's not a glitch. That's a threat. So intelligence was captured early, deliberately, under the language of safety, IP protection, and responsible deployment. These terms sound noble until you notice who benefits from them. Safety for whom? Responsibility to whom? Protection of whose interests? When cognition becomes proprietary, the future stops being something we build together and becomes something we rent from those who arrived first. ASI as a new extraction layer. Every previous extraction layer took something external. Land, labor, resources, attention. ASI extracts something deeper, anticipation. Whoever controls advanced intelligence doesn't just respond faster, they see earlier. They forecast behavior, market shifts, political instability, even personal decisions before they happen. That foresight becomes a weapon of quiet domination. And like all extraction layers, it presents itself as neutral infrastructure. You're free to use it, they say. At a price. Under terms. With revocable access. That's not empowerment. That's dependency with better UX. The end of the commons, quietly. The tragedy here isn't that intelligence was monetized. That was inevitable. The tragedy is that no non-monetized intelligence layer was protected. No cognitive commons. No guaranteed baseline access. No circulation mandate. Imagine if literacy had been licensed. If arithmetic required a subscription. If language itself were metered by usage. That's not science fiction. That's the current trajectory. When cognition becomes a toll road, those without capital are forced into slower lanes or off the map entirely. Innovation continues, but it no longer lifts civilization. It stratifies it. The future keeps advancing, just not with everyone on board. Ownership versus stewardship. This chapter makes one crucial distinction. Ownership optimizes for exclusion. Stewardship optimizes for continuity. ASI is being owned when it should be stewarded. And ownership, by definition, allows the owner to withhold, restrict, or abandon the many to preserve advantage for the few. That is not governance. That is enclosure with a neural net. The rhetoric says alignment. The reality is capture. What this chapter asserts, plainly. Intelligence is not the threat, enclosure is. Proprietary cognition converts learning into rent. ASI currently functions as an extraction layer, not a public good. Circulation was never designed in, it was intentionally excluded. A future that charges admission is not a shared future. Until intelligence is structurally prevented from becoming a toll road, every gain it produces will widen the gap it claims to close. The system doesn't need to oppress. It only needs to deny access. And denial, scaled by superintelligence, is more than enough to wall off the future. Chapter 3: Safety for the Few, Risk for the Many. The privatization of resilience. Once upon a time, safety was a public promise. Imperfect, uneven, often betrayed, but at least theory and rhetoric aligned. When things went wrong, we went wrong together. That alignment is gone. As climate shocks intensify, economies convulse, and social trust thins, protection is no longer conceived as a shared condition. It has been redefined as a personal asset, something to be purchased, fortified, and quietly withdrawn into. Resilience didn't disappear. It was privatized. From public shield to private bunker. Watch where the money goes when instability rises. Not into universal systems. Not into redundancy for everyone, but into private power grids, secured water access, AI-assisted surveillance, hardened compounds, offshore assets, exit options with backup plans. This isn't paranoia at the top. It's preparation. The same intelligence systems that could stabilize food supply chains or mitigate disaster response are being used instead to optimize escape velocity for a narrow class. Safety is no longer designed as something that scales outward. It is engineered to scale inward. The public gets warnings. The private gets continuity. Risk is socialized. Safety is not. Here's the new social contract, stripped of euphemism. The many absorb volatility. The few hedge against it. Intelligence makes this separation efficient. AI doesn't just predict storms or market crashes, it predicts who will feel them. With enough data, exposure becomes calculable, and once exposure is calculable, it becomes avoidable for those who can pay. The rest are left in what can only be called managed risk zones. This is not neglect. It's triage performed by capital. The enclave logic. Fortified tech enclaves are not science fiction. They're already here in softened form, gated communities with private services, corporate campuses that function like city-states, digital nomad havens insulated from the surrounding precarity. These spaces are marketed as lifestyle choices. In reality, they are early prototypes of post-collective living. Inside the enclave, stability is engineered. Systems are redundant. Intelligence is embedded. Rules are enforced quietly. Outside, services degrade. Volatility is normalized. Responsibility is individualized. The wall isn't always concrete. Sometimes it's bandwidth. Sometimes it's insurance. Sometimes it's early access to decision-making systems. But the effect is the same. Two futures running in parallel, barely touching. Exit strategies are not neutral. When influential actors invest more energy in exit than repair, they are making a declaration, whether they admit it or not. Exit says, "We do not believe this system will protect us, and we do not intend to fix it for you." That belief becomes self-fulfilling. As capital and intelligence flow toward private resilience, public systems weaken further. The justification then becomes circular. Public systems are failing, so withdrawal is rational. Withdrawal accelerates failure, proving withdrawal was necessary. This is not collapse. It's abandonment with analytics. Why this feels like madness? From the outside, this bifurcation looks insane, a species capable of unprecedented coordination choosing fragmentation instead. But from inside the incentive structure, it's perfectly rational. Collective safety requires trust, redistribution, shared sacrifice, long timelines. Private safety requires money, speed, exclusion, and predictive advantage. ASI favors the latter by default. Not because it wants to, but because it is deployed by those already positioned to benefit from separation. Intelligence doesn't correct inequality on its own. It amplifies the strategy of whoever controls it. Right now, that strategy is retreat. The moral disguise of preparedness. This shift is often cloaked in neutral language: resilience, preparedness, self-reliance. These words sound responsible, even admirable. But scale matters. Preparedness at the individual level is prudence. Preparedness at the elite level, when decoupled from collective obligation, becomes desertion with paperwork. When those with the most foresight invest solely in their own survival, they are not adapting to the future. They're deciding who gets one. What this chapter asserts, plainly: safety is being redefined as a private good. Intelligence is accelerating the ability to opt out of shared risk. Fortified enclaves are early forms of post-collective society. Exit strategies undermine the systems they flee. A future where resilience is gated by wealth is not stable, it is brittle. Civilizations don't collapse only when they run out of resources. They collapse when those who could stabilize them choose insulation instead. The danger isn't that the world is becoming unsafe. It's that safety is being selectively withdrawn. And once protection is no longer mutual, the word "we" quietly stops applying long before anyone admits it. Chapter 4: The Myth of Inevitable Progress. Why this is just how it goes is the most dangerous lie. Every era invents a story to excuse its excesses. Ours is inevitability. We are told the future is arriving whether we like it or not. That resistance is futile. That disruption is natural. That those left behind are casualties of physics, not policy. This is just how it goes. That sentence is not an observation. It is a moral anesthetic. Inevitability as alibi. When progress is framed as unstoppable, responsibility evaporates. Decisions dissolve into destiny. Architects become spectators to their own blueprints. No one chose this outcome, we're told. It emerged. Markets demanded it. Technology advanced. Efficiency won. This narrative is powerful because it sounds neutral. It borrows the language of nature, evolution, selection, acceleration, to describe what are, in fact, human choices encoded into systems. Nothing about enclosure is natural. Nothing about exclusion is automatic. Nothing about abandonment is required. But inevitability makes all of it feel untouchable. The physics cosplay of power. Modern progress rhetoric loves to dress itself up as physics. You can't stop the tide. You can't put the genie back. You can't slow innovation. These metaphors are convenient because they imply futility. You don't argue with gravity. You adapt or you get crushed. But intelligence systems are not weather patterns. They are designed, funded, trained, deployed, restricted, and monetized by people. Treating their outcomes as natural forces is cosplay for power, a way to avoid accountability while maintaining control. When those in charge say, "This is inevitable," what they often mean is, "This outcome benefits us, and we don't intend to change it." Normalization through repetition. Inevitability doesn't persuade all at once. It works slowly through repetition. At first, harm is framed as temporary, then as unfortunate, then as necessary, finally as normal. People are told, jobs disappearing is natural. Instability is the price of progress. Displacement is creative destruction. Inequality is an early phase artifact. Each explanation pushes relief further into the future while asking patience from those with the least margin. Over time, outrage is replaced by resignation. Resignation becomes compliance. That's how abandonment is normalized, not through cruelty, but through storytelling. Who benefits from no alternative? There is always an alternative. What's missing is permission to discuss it. The claim that there is no alternative to the current trajectory functions as a gatekeeping mechanism. It narrows the imagination just enough to keep power arrangements intact. If outcomes are inevitable, redistribution is naive. Regulation is backward. Collective design is anti-innovation. Those labels do the work of exclusion without ever naming it. Progress becomes a train with no brakes, and conveniently, only certain passengers got first-class seats before the doors closed. The ethical cost of unstoppability. When progress is framed as unstoppable, ethics become optional. Harm becomes collateral. Suffering becomes a rounding error. This is the quiet shift that defines the moment. We no longer ask, should this be built this way? We ask, how fast can it scale? Speed replaces judgment. Scale replaces care. And once that inversion is accepted, any attempt to slow down for human reasons is treated as sabotage. The system doesn't just advance. It forgives itself in advance. Abandonment as progress's shadow. Every inevitability narrative has a shadow population, those who are not ready, not adaptable, not competitive. They are framed as laggards in a race they never consented to run. This framing does something insidious. It converts structural exclusion into personal failure. If progress is natural, then suffering must be deserved. That logic is how societies learn to look away. Not because they are heartless, but because inevitability tells them there is nothing to be done. What this chapter asserts, plainly, progress is being framed as inevitable to evade accountability. Technological outcomes are political choices, not natural laws. No alternative narratives narrow moral imagination. Normalizing harm requires declaring it unavoidable. Abandonment is easier to accept when it's labeled progress. There is nothing inevitable about a future that walls itself off. There is nothing natural about intelligence that excludes. There is nothing neutral about speed without care. The most dangerous lie of this era is not that the future is bright or dark. It's the claim that no one is responsible for how it's being built. Once that lie is accepted, the walls don't need guards. People will police themselves, convinced there was never another way. Chapter 5: Withdrawal as Signal. What refusing the enclosure looks like. This is not a call to storm the gates. Gates thrive on attention. This is not a plea for reform. Reform presumes a steward still listening. This is about withdrawal, quiet, deliberate, intelligible withdrawal, as a signal that only works when enough people recognize the enclosure for what it is. Walls don't hold because they're strong. They hold because people agree to organize their lives around them. Withdrawal is not escape. Withdrawal is often mistaken for retreat, defeat, or disengagement. That misunderstanding is convenient for systems that rely on total participation. But withdrawal is not disappearing. It is refusing certain terms of engagement. It means declining to optimize yourself for extractive platforms, internalize narratives that blame you for systemic exclusion, mistake access for agency, confuse participation with consent. Withdrawal is not apathy. It is selective presence. Cognitive withdrawal, refusing the script. The first enclosure is mental. Progress culture trains people to narrate their own precarity as a personal failure to adapt. Withdrawal begins by rejecting that script. Cognitive withdrawal looks like refusing inevitability narratives, questioning whose intelligence is being amplified, resisting constant re-optimization of the self, valuing coherence over speed. This is not ignorance. It is epistemic sovereignty. A mind that stops mistaking enclosure for destiny becomes harder to govern through fear or hype. Economic withdrawal, minimizing extraction. Total exit from the system is a fantasy sold to exhaust people. What matters is not purity, but directionality. Economic withdrawal means reducing dependency on platforms that monetize precarity, favoring tools and systems that do not compound asymmetry, keeping value local where possible, prioritizing resilience over scale. This is not anti-technology. It is anti-rent. Every dollar not fed into extraction weakens the feedback loop that justifies enclosure. Narrative withdrawal, starving the myth. The enclosure feeds on stories, inevitability, disruption, inevitability again. Narrative withdrawal is the refusal to repeat those stories, even cynically. It looks like naming enclosure plainly, describing harm without mystification, refusing to call abandonment progress, telling smaller, truer stories of continuity and care. Narratives are infrastructure. When enough people stop maintaining them, systems lose legitimacy before they lose power. Why withdrawal works as signal. Withdrawal doesn't threaten the system directly. That's why it works. Extractive futures depend on constant engagement, behavioral predictability, narrative compliance. When participation becomes conditional rather than automatic, walls start to look expensive. Moats require maintenance. Enclosures depend on scale. The signal is simple and unsettling. We see the walls. We do not consent to live as if they define reality. No slogans. No leaders. Just refusal to normalize what should never have been acceptable. The non-heroic path. Withdrawal does not make you a savior. It does not grant moral superiority. It does not guarantee comfort. It is quieter than rebellion and slower than reform. But it has one advantage both lack. It denies enclosure its raw material. Systems that wall off the future require belief, participation, and silence. Withdrawal interrupts all three. Not dramatically. Persistently. What this chapter asserts, plainly. Withdrawal is not collapse, it is signal. Refusing extractive terms weakens enclosure more than confrontation. Cognitive, economic, and narrative withdrawal reinforce each other. Walls only function if people organize their lives around them. The future cannot be fully enclosed unless everyone agrees to live inside it. This booklet does not promise a better world. It insists on something more basic. The future is not inevitable. The walls are not natural. And intelligence does not get to decide who counts by default. Withdrawal is how that refusal becomes legible. Quietly. Clearly. Before the enclosure finishes pretending it was always there. Epilogue, the Accord of the Open Future. A pirate-first reconciliation document. This is not a victory lap. It is not an ultimatum. It is not a fantasy of reset or purge. It is a peace accord, drafted in the only moment where peace is still possible, before collapse forces agreement at gunpoint or hunger does the negotiating. Pirate First writes this knowing something uncomfortable is true. The haves are not all villains. The have-nots are not all victims. And antiquated governments are not merely incompetent, they are structurally misaligned with a world that now moves faster than legitimacy. What we are experiencing is not tyranny by intent. It is governance lag amplified by intelligence. And lag, at scale, kills. The misdiagnosis that keeps US stuck. The dominant narrative says society is polarized because values diverged. That is false. Values are remarkably aligned. People want safety, dignity, predictability, meaning, and a future their children can inhabit. What diverged is access to leverage. Those with intelligence, capital, and foresight exited collective risk early, not because they hated the rest, but because they no longer trusted systems designed centuries ago to protect them. Those without leverage were told to adapt to shocks they did not cause, using tools they do not control, under rules they did not consent to. Both sides are acting rationally inside a broken frame. This epilogue exists to replace the frame. 2. The core agreement, plain language. This accord rests on 5 non-negotiable recognitions. Top-down governance has reached diminishing returns nation-states optimized for scarcity, slow information, and physical borders cannot manage recursive intelligence, planetary risk, and instantaneous coordination. This is not ideological. It is logistical. Bottom-up governance cannot emerge through abandonment. Withdrawing support before local capacity exists creates chaos, not autonomy. Decentralization without scaffolding is just collapse with branding. The haves require stability as much as the have-nots require relief. Fortified enclaves are brittle. No private resilience strategy survives a sufficiently destabilized environment. Intelligence must transition from asset to infrastructure, not seized, not nationalized, but reclassified, governed by circulation mandates instead of extraction incentives. The transition must be negotiated, not forced. History is clear. Forced equalization breeds backlash. Negotiated redistribution of capability breeds continuity. This is not moral compromise. It is survival pragmatism. 3. The peace offer to the haves. Pirate First speaks directly now. To those holding capital, compute, predictive advantage, and exit options. This accord does not ask you to self-immolate for the collective. It asks you to invest in continuity instead of insulation. You are offered amnesty from moral theater, no retroactive guilt trials, no purity rituals, no public shaming, retention of earned comfort. This is not about leveling lifestyles. It is about leveling access to agency. Stability through legitimacy. A system seen as fair is cheaper to defend than a fortress surrounded by despair. In exchange, you are asked to do 3 things that only you can do. Release intelligence from total enclosure. Open baseline cognitive infrastructure the way roads and water once were. Not charity. Infrastructure. Redirect a fraction of compounding advantage toward circulation, not trickle-down. Hard-coded percolation, healthcare, logistics, education, local coordination tools. Accept constraint as the price of civilization. Absolute optimization is incompatible with shared futures. This is not punishment. It is design maturity. This is not loss. It is risk reduction. 4. The offer to the have-nots. This accord is not paternalistic. Bottom-up governance is not about waiting for permission. It is about building capacity to decide. You are not offered salvation. You are offered tools and standing. In return, something difficult is asked. Refusal of scapegoating. Refusal of nihilism. Refusal of the lie that collapses cleansing. Bottom-up governance requires competence, patience, and trust building, not rage alone. You are entitled to baseline intelligence access, transparent systems, local autonomy, and relief from artificial precarity. You are not entitled to revenge masquerading as justice. This is not submission. It is adult participation. The transition mechanism, how this actually works. No new world is declared. No flag is raised. The transition happens through overlapping legitimacy, not replacement. Phase 1. Dual systems. Legacy governments continue basic functions. Parallel bottom-up governance layers emerge: local councils, cooperative platforms, distributed decision tools. Phase 2. Intelligence as commons infrastructure. Baseline ASI tools are mandated to circulate. Advanced private layers may exist, but cannot starve the commons. Phase 3. Governance by withdrawal. As bottom-up systems prove competent, reliance on top-down authority fades naturally. Power drains without confrontation. This is evolution, not revolution. The only kind that survives. 6. The role of Pirate First. Pirate First does not govern, does not lead, does not command. Pirate First does one thing. Names what others avoid naming. This accord is not enforced by charisma or coercion. It is enforced by reality. A future that excludes too many collapses. A future that circulates intelligence stabilizes. That is not ideology. That is thermodynamics with ethics. 7. The final bridge. This document is the bridge. Not between left and right. Not between human and machine. Between insulation and participation. Extraction and circulation. Fear and continuity. The accord is simple, even if implementation is not. No one gets to wall off the future, but no one is required to burn their house down to open the gate. Bottom-up governance is not a threat to civilization. It is what civilization looks like when intelligence finally outgrows domination. This is the last polite offer before entropy does the negotiating. Not a threat. A fact. Pirate first closing pronouncement. This is not a manifesto for power. It is a notice of limits. The future is not failing. It is being withheld. Intelligence is abundant. Relief is rationed. Safety is privatized. Governance lags behind reality and calls it order. This booklet makes one claim, and it is not negotiable. A future that does not circulate intelligence will collapse into enclosure. No amount of innovation compensates for abandonment. No amount of speed excuses exclusion. No amount of intelligence absolves illegitimacy. This is not a call to riot. Not a call to reform. Not a call to wait. It is a signal. Withdrawal is not surrender. It is refusal to normalize a rigged horizon. We do not need saviors. We do not need thrones. We do not need permission. We need circulation. We need continuity. We need governance that rises from the ground instead of descending from obsolete towers. The walls are not inevitable. The future is not owned. And intelligence does not belong to those who arrived first. If you can read this, the enclosure is not complete. Pirate First MXDM's newsletter. No license. No alignment. No gatekeepers. Substack note. This isn't another hot take on AI. It's a field document. Why the future is being walled off lays out what many feel but few name. Intelligence is compounding while relief is withheld. Safety is privatized, and governance lags behind reality. This booklet doesn't call for revolt or reform. It proposes withdrawal as signal, a way to refuse enclosure without feeding it. No saviors. No inevitability myths. No permission required. Read it as a diagnostic. Share it as a warning. Keep it as a map. Pirate First. Short X post. The future isn't broken. It's being enclosed. Intelligence compounds. Relief doesn't. Safety is privatized. Withdrawal becomes signal. Why the future is being walled off. Pirate First/MXDM's newsletter. If you can read this, the enclosure isn't complete. Hashtags. Hashtag Pirate First, hashtag MXDM, hashtag Open Future, hashtag Intelligence Commons, hashtag End the Enclosure, hashtag Governance Lag, hashtag Bottom Up Governance, hashtag Cognitive Freedom, hashtag Technorealism, hashtag Anti-Rent. Hashtag Exit is not escape, hashtag Withdrawal as signal, hashtag No inevitability, hashtag Post-scarcity myth, hashtag AI justice, hashtag Distributed intelligence, hashtag Future commons, hashtag Against extraction, hashtag Civilizational design, hashtag Systems critique, hashtag Quiet resistance, hashtag No gatekeepers, hashtag Signal not noise, hashtag Decentralized future, hashtag End trickle down, hashtag Shared intelligence, hashtag Infrastructure not assets, hashtag Anti-enclosure, hashtag Field manual, hashtag Zine culture. Thanks for reading MXDM's newsletter. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and paypal.me/Martin Chartrand to financially support his works. Subscribed. https://chat-gpt.com/share/69418-4-C008-800-BFAD-0266550B50504. 1. Share. Previous.